For most of America's early history, that piece of paper didn't exist. If there was no federal paper dollar, what did Americans actually use as money? In early colonial America, the absence of a national paper currency or federal banking system left communities facing a daily puzzle: how to trade and settle debts when official coins were scarce. Imported gold and silver coins existed, but not nearly enough to cover the needs of farmers, blacksmiths, shopkeepers, and neighbors exchanging goods. Most people relied on barter, trading what they had for what they needed, but barter was slow and awkward. Picture a farmer with a wagon full of wheat and a blacksmith with a set of iron tools. For a trade to happen, each person had to want exactly what the other offered, at the same time, and in the right amount. This is called the double coincidence of wants. If the blacksmith didn't need wheat, or the farmer didn't need tools, the deal fell apart. Even if both agreed, the question remained: how much wheat for a hammer or for a plow blade? As local trade grew, people needed something more practical, an item everyone would accept, not because they wanted it themselves, but because they knew someone else would take it later. Economists call this a medium of exchange, something portable, recognized, and trusted enough that it could be traded for almost anything. The search for such a medium set Americans on a path toward shells, tobacco, silver coins, and eventually, paper promises. Each solution began with the same problem: how do you pay when barter alone can't keep up with the needs of a growing marketplace? In colonial Virginia and Maryland, tobacco leaf stood in for coins and bills. By the mid-1600s, it paid for goods, settled debts, and covered taxes. Planters brought their harvest to public warehouses, where inspectors judged each batch. Inferior tobacco was destroyed. Only the best earned a warehouse receipt. These slips recorded weight and grade, serving as claims to specific inspected tobacco stored on site. Merchants and neighbors accepted receipts for large transactions, but the crop's bulk, perishability, and shifting value made everyday exchanges tricky. A pound of tobacco could buy shoes 1 month, then lose half its worth after harvest. The system's strength lay in the warehouse's reputation and the quality of inspection, not the leaf itself. Farther north, wampum moved through indigenous hands long before colonists arrived. Crafted from white and purple shells, wampum beads were woven into belts that marked treaties, ceremonies, and agreements. Wampum carried meaning as record, symbol, and bond, never just as trade goods. Dutch and English traders used wampum in the fur trade, and in 1637, Massachusetts set legal rates for its use in small debts. Yet for indigenous peoples, wampum's value ran deeper than commerce, rooted in tradition and memory, untouched by colonial attempts to fix its price. Silver coins from Spanish America, the Spanish dollar, or piece of 8, became the backbone of trade in colonial North America. Each coin was stamped with a weight and purity that merchants recognized from Boston to Buenos Aires. The coin's reputation traveled farther than any king's decree, moving across borders and languages. British law restricted the export of English silver, leaving the colonies short of official coinage. Into that gap, Spanish dollars poured in by the millions, minted in Mexico City, Lima, and Potosi, and trusted for their consistent silver content. 1 Spanish dollar equaled 8 reales. For smaller payments, people took a knife and cut the coin into halves, quarters, or eighths, literally making change. The phrase 2 bits for a $quarter comes from these cut pieces. Over time, the Spanish dollar's reliability made it the reference point for pricing land, goods, and even wages. When Congress established the U.S. Mint in 1792, lawmakers defined the new American dollar by the weight and value of the Spanish milled dollar that everyone already used. In this way, a foreign coin shaped the foundation of American commerce and left its mark on the dollar we know today. In 1690, Massachusetts returned from a failed assault on Quebec with empty coffers and unpaid soldiers. Lacking gold or silver, the General Court issued paper bills of credit, official promises that future taxes or colonial revenues would cover their value. For a returning soldier, these notes offered hope, but also uncertainty. Would a Boston merchant treat the bill as equal to coin or demand a discount? Some merchants hesitated, wary of paper not backed by metal. Yet, at tax time, the government accepted the bills at full value, giving them a legitimacy private trade could not guarantee. This split between public acceptance for taxes and private skepticism in daily commerce became a hallmark of colonial money. Soon, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and other colonies issued their own notes, each with different denominations, rules, and redemption terms. A note trusted in one colony might be refused in another. The result was a tangled web of currencies where trust, local law, and the promise of future tax receipts shaped every transaction. By the summer of 1775, the colonies faced a new kind of crisis. The Continental Congress, responsible for raising and supplying an army, had almost no power to collect taxes, and little access to gold or silver. To pay troops, buy supplies, and keep the war effort alive, Congress turned to paper, issuing millions of dollars in Continental notes. These were promises, not backed by hard metal, but by the hope that the new government would someday redeem them. At first, merchants and farmers accepted the notes, trusting that victory and future taxes would give them value. But as the war dragged on, Congress printed more to cover mounting costs. The flood of new paper money meant each note bought less and less. Prices soared. Shopkeepers demanded more Continentals for the same goods. Buyers struggled to judge what anything was worth, and debts paid in paper lost value before they could be spent. The phrase, "not worth a Continental," became a common insult, echoing through markets and taverns as confidence evaporated. By the early 1780s, the notes had lost nearly all practical value. Sellers refused to take them. Paper money, without a strong government or reliable promise behind it, had failed the test of public trust. The marketplace turned once again to whatever people believed would hold value: coins, foreign currency, even barter, leaving the lesson that money is only as strong as the faith people place in its issuer. After independence, American money splintered into a maze of private promises. State-chartered banks printed their own notes, each a pledge to redeem in gold or silver. Value hinged on the issuing bank's solvency and reputation. A merchant in New York handed a note from an Ohio bank, weighed the risks. Distance meant a discount. A failed bank could erase value, and counterfeits blurred the line between real and worthless. Redemption meant turning a note into hard coin or a recognized settlement balance, but not every promise held. To judge unfamiliar notes, merchants relied on banknote reporters, weekly publications listing genuine designs, descriptions, warnings about counterfeits, and the latest discounts. In a dramatized composite, a merchant in the 1840s consults a reporter, mid-sale, searching for the bank's name and discount rate. Some order emerged in Boston with the Suffolk Bank System, founded in 1818. Participating banks sent notes to Suffolk for redemption and settlement, creating a private clearinghouse for New England. Still, American money remained fragmented, its value always in question. The Civil War forced the federal government into uncharted territory, as the cost of mobilizing troops and supplies quickly outstripped the nation's gold and silver reserves. In 1861, Congress and the Union Treasury responded by issuing demand notes, paper currency backed by the federal government, redeemable for coin on demand. This marked the first time Americans used notes that were obligations of the United States rather than state banks or private issuers. Yet as the war's expenses mounted, even these measures proved insufficient. In February 1862, Congress passed the Legal Tender Act, creating United States notes, which soon became known as greenbacks. Unlike demand notes, greenbacks could not be exchanged for gold or silver on demand. Instead, their value came from federal law. Congress declared them legal tender for all debts, public and private. This meant every merchant and lender had to accept them at face value. The credibility of the federal government, not a vault of precious metal, now stood behind the nation's money for the first time. Federal paper money did not erase local habits or end the patchwork of regional notes overnight. Instead, the government's promise now replaced the old web of private and state guarantees. The authority of Congress and the Treasury gave these new notes a reach and reliability that no single bank or state could match. Still, many Americans continued to use familiar forms of money for years, blending old and new in daily life. The National Banking Acts of the 1860s pushed the system further, creating nationally chartered banks that issued standardized national banknotes. These notes looked alike across the country, with only the bank's name and charter number to set them apart. Unlike the wartime greenbacks, national banknotes were backed by U.S. government bonds and managed through a federal charter. The move toward a single, uniform currency was a process, not an instant change, a slow relocation of trust from local promises to national authority. Your dollar bill may look simple, but behind it is a centuries-long experiment in trust. When you hand over a dollar today, what are you really handing over? The answer isn't just paper, it's a promise, tested and renewed every time we accept it.